This is not a regular Shadowversity video, and not just for this different camera angle. No. This video is actually recorded live on my new channel, Game Night, in the regular segment we do called Nightly News, which is kind of a reaction podcast where I get to look at what other people are doing on the internet related to swords and knights and fantasy and all that stuff, with co-hosts where there's great fun banter, and you get to see my live reactions and reacting to things that I wouldn't normally get to make a dedicated video here on Shadowversity. This is why I made Game Night, to produce the content I wanted to produce that doesn't really fit on Shadowversity. So a lot of it is live streams. Like I said, Nightly News was done live, and I'll only be bringing over some segments and content from Nightly News to Shadowversity very rarely, like this one right here. Most of the content, of course, will be staying on Game Night, which is why if you haven't subscribed, you're really missing out, because a lot of people ask me to respond to things that, as I mentioned, doesn't deserve a dedicated video, but now I can do it just in these fun little segment parts on Game Night, like me reacting to Wonder Woman's armor, for instance, or, you know, sharing my internal musing and thoughts on, did we really throw corpses over castle walls in medieval sieges? I'm doing video game live streams, doing a playthrough of Dragon's Dogma. And we also have more condensed supercuts of those live streams, and what we've just done today, we have filmed the first role-playing session with some of your favourite creators in the community of the sword.
We three kings of Orient are bearing gifts, we travel afar.
I have a dog with 7 paws, with bloodshot eyes and savage jaws. His teeth are long and pointed, and his legs are double-jointed, and he often eats a pussycat for tea.
Oh, that's coming out as gobbledygook. Sorry, you're going to have to sort that out.
That's Lloyd of Lindy Beige, Metatron from the Metatron, Matt Easton from Scholar Gudatoria, and Jason Kingsley from Modern History TV. That's right, we have a big crossover event where we are doing a role-playing game all together, which will be getting released on Game Night. So if you haven't subscribed, you really should, because you're going to be missing out on so much fun, awesome content, whether it's just entertainment, role-playing games, video games, but it's also history-related reaction kind of content, just like what you're seeing now in this special kind of longer deep dive reaction. With the team I have helping me out now, Oz, the legendary meme lord, Sir Ben and Sir Nathan, we are pumping out content. Indeed, if you actually want to get some behind the scene vlogs that will be coming out weekly, well, you get access to them if you want to help support us on Patreon or Subscribestar.
I am Sir Ben, Shad's helper, or one of Shad's helpers. There's going to be videos of just weekly summaries, stuff that we're doing, inside look at behind the scenes at what we're doing.
Greetings! I am not Shad, but his intern, Nathan.
Loads of content, heaps of fun, and this deep dive segment is just kind of an example of some of the things we get up to on Game Night. But as I mentioned, this video specifically has its place on Shadowversity, hence why it's being uploaded here. But because it was done live, you will notice it's a bit more rambly, okay? I share a lot of kind of preliminary caveats, just to mention, because I really like Mike Loads, and I don't want people to think that I was going after him or trying to insult him or anything like that. So you'll see me explain a couple of important things to begin with, but it's a really good video. I hope you enjoy, and if you don't want to miss out on any other content that won't be appearing here on Shadowversity, like I mentioned, go check out Game Night. Hope to see you there. The person I want to reply to isn't necessarily, well, he's in our community, but is not a YouTuber. Okay, so the man I'm talking about is the legendary Mike Loads. Mike Loads is the prominent, in the public eye, medieval enthusiast of the previous generation. And it's very likely, if you watch documentaries, okay, about medieval period anything, you've probably come across one of his documentaries, because he's made a lot of documentaries about medieval related stuff. A lot of them are really, really good. A lot of them are good. Some, I think, have questionable, statements in regards to accuracy, but that's the same with me. And I am very confident Mike could watch all my videos, and in a good number of them say, because we all have different strengths in what we know, okay? And I'm very confident Mike knows a lot in certain areas that would blow me out of the water. And in the video that has him in it currently, that I'm kind of interested in responding to, there are some things which he mentions that I've done a bit more research on in certain areas, and some things need a bit more clarification, a bit more context. Some things are wrong, and some things could be clarified better. And so it's that balance, because I'm very confident he could do it to me, and I would welcome him to, because we all learn more and gain more knowledge as a result. And so this is kind of the lead up into this. I'm not sure anyone has ever done a rebuttal to my clothes. And a lot of what he says is spot on. Okay, there's just a number of one or two things that I think, yeah. It's a video on the YouTube channel Wired. So Wired doesn't have like a dedicated host. They make like just interesting videos on interesting subjects. And one of the types of videos that you're seeing on YouTube is like expert reviews thing. And it's very similar to the types of videos that we make. Like I will review the Mandalorian spear from Mandalorian, and I do that and stuff. And so they're kind of doing that type of content, but they bring in other people to review it for them. And usually I have had very little interest in these type of videos because the people they bring on don't know a thing. Like they might get a stuntman to review a sword fight, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that was a great stance," and so no, it wasn't, you know. But there are some that are good where they get like, I don't know, people who are visual effects, you know, designers and stuff to review visual effects from a scene or something like that. And there's a couple of channels that do it. There's another channel, wasn't Wired, that actually got Dave Rawlings on to review some sword fights. And Dave Rawlings is a legend, okay, in terms of He-Man and stuff. And it was awesome to see them actually putting on someone who knew their stuff to look at this. And Wired is kind of doing this with Mike, because Mike does know his stuff and he gets a lot right. Like I said, there's just one or two things that I think would be worth sharing some thoughts on, clarification. And some, like I said, as I mentioned, and I want to reiterate, enthusiasts like me, we find areas in which we're really interested in, and we do kind of deep dives and we get a really good round of knowledge in a specific weapon or a specific thing. But I haven't done that with every weapon, and there are, you know, parts in my knowledge in which haven't been filled out yet. A great example is when Matt mentioned the fact that the spear could have been hollow, and he points out there were full metal shafted spears in history that are hollow. I didn't know that. It's great to know now. There was an area in my knowledge where that was lacking, and now it's filled in thanks to someone being willing to say, you said this, here's some better references. And even with someone as legendary and has such a pedigree as Mike Lodes, it still exists. There are areas in which our own knowledge, it has gaps in it. And I'm just in position in some of these things, in some of his statements where he touched on areas that I've done a little bit more deep dive digging in. It's like, oh, okay, well, here's some more reference. So Mike probably didn't edit this. And I reckon Mike, when looking at this, probably went on a good old ramble, a 10-minute ramble on something that he sees in there. And they probably only took out 5 seconds from that for him to address that part. And so some of the things I might be addressing, Mike could have actually said himself and clarified himself in the original footage, but it was cut out because Wired, you know, just cutting out, and they're happy to leave out important points of context. And there's one that really does look like it. We'll get to it, but it's when he's talking about the weights of bows. And he says the wrong weights of medieval longbows, much in the higher, but the cut is that you can tell he had said something previously that was cut before he actually states what the weights were. And so I'm pretty confident he actually said the lower end of weights, but they cut that out. And so that wouldn't be on Mike at all. That was just an editing mistake, but still deserves clarification. And so I'm not saying Mike doesn't know these things when I'm saying they could have been editing mistakes. There's that, absolutely, that needs to be addressed as an important caveat before really dive into it. Oh, and the other thing is a point about overemphasize and generalizing. Okay. I think Mike probably knows some of the things I was like, of course I know that. You don't need to tell me. I was just speaking casually or be adding emphasis for the point of conveying the message. And this first point is exactly that. And let's play that first point.
You don't ever block with a sword. That's not how it's done. I'm using a flat, I knock it aside.
Okay. So is it more preferable to parry and knock aside a block instead of doing a static straight block? It depends. Could you say most of the time? Perhaps. But to say that you don't ever do a flat block, you don't just do like a straight block, is it's too far. It's an absolute. It's like, because of course there'd be situations where you would want to do it. I think Mike would probably know this as well. And I have seen a lot of his documentaries, and I think that might be, if anything, sometimes he really likes to emphasize a point, to the point of perhaps overemphasizing it into an extreme, into an absolute, when it really, no, you could say it's better to do it this way in a lot of circumstances, but to say you simply don't, it's like, don't, you know? So that's the first point. And so we'll go to the next point in the video.
The advantage of a two-edged sword is if one edge is getting a little dull, you can turn it around and you've got a second edge to use. So it can be a considerable advantage on the battlefield that you're keeping one edge sharp.
See, I wouldn't say that, like, yes, that is an advantage, but for me, one of the more prominent, significant advantages of having a two-edged sword is you can strike with the back edge. To say that, this implies then that you're only ever going to be cutting with one edge. And yes, you might cut with one edge more primarily, but to say you would never cut with the back edge in conjunction with using a front edge in certain movements, well, that would be wrong if that's the implication, because there are absolutely times where you'll cut with the back edge without needing to actually, you know, flip around the sword in your hand. So if I'm holding like there, I can cut with the back edge, okay, you know, strike here, swing around, just like there, and I'm not needing to turn it around and use the other side of the sword. Mike might have mentioned that. It might have been cut, I don't know. But it's worth adding the context just if we're wanting to be more accurate in this discussion of single and double-edged swords.
The advantage of a single-edged sword is usually that it's less expensive because you don't have to have such a sophisticated temper.
Are single-edged swords cheaper? Yes and no. Because less grinding in the manufacturing process to put one edge on and stuff like that. Does that mean they'll be sold cheaper? Not necessarily. You could get, you know, double-edged swords that were cheaper for many reasons. If they were being bulk made and they could be really high quality, the cheap price, trade reasons, and so to say that they're universally cheaper, no.
The advantage of a single-edged sword is usually that it's less expensive because you don't have to have such a sophisticated temper.
Don't have to have such a sophisticated temper on a single-edged sword. That's I would love to, like, that's a segment where I feel he's probably drawing that from something, from a source somewhere. And I'd love to know what's drawn him to that, because in some instances, the reverse is true. You can have a more sophisticated temper on a single-edged sword because you can do differential hardening, which warps it and curves it in one way. You wouldn't want a differential hardening temper process on a double-edged sword, stereotypically. You would want that double-edged blade to be symmetrical and straight and not warped in a curve. And so it almost seems like the opposite can be true in certain circumstances. So, yeah, it's just, that was one of those, I was like, I wasn't sure of it. Like, you know, I don't want to give the impression that this video is terrible, because we're jumping to those specific points where I had something to say. In all the parts where I'm not commenting on, it's fine. It's good stuff. Mike does a great job. We will jump to the next part here.
Why? Why would you throw it? It is so stupid to throw away a weapon.
Is he overemphasizing it? Would there be no situation under the sun in which you would ever want to throw a sword? Again, it's about making absolute statements. I would say there might be some situations where you throwing a sword could be your last resort, last option, and stuff like that. And we have good evidence that it was at least done sometimes, and I believe it's in Fiore, and Scarlegrim's made videos on this about throwing a sword, where it actually talks about throwing a sword. And I can't remember if it was talking about defending against someone throwing a sword or describing it, but it shows the image, the way, and it's interesting. They even show the way in which you hold the sword when being thrown, and you kind of hold it like this when being thrown. As Fiore and Scarlegrim has 2 whole videos testing it out, and you can get a level of effect in it. Is it stupid, just flat, you should never consider? I don't think so. I think there are situations which you might, and even if you're like the context, sometimes it can be hard to figure out the context. This is how you defend it. I guess you shouldn't do it and stuff. That is implying that at least some people did do it. And I would say, as a general principle, I would agree with Mike. It's like, you probably don't want to throw your sword, especially if you have many other options. Okay, why would you? This is your weapon. You don't want to disarm yourself. It is stupid. Okay, but to say you would, there's no circumstance ever as a last resort or something in which, and again, Mike will probably agree with what I'm saying here, because again, I can see the logic. There is a lot of stupidity. If you could you imagine, someone's in a duel and they throw the sword and the guy just moves aside. It's like, all right, thanks, you lost your weapon. Yeah, utterly stupid. So I totally get that. But again, it's a matter of the absolutes, okay? And It'd be interesting. I'd love to know if Michael said, and look, maybe there are circumstances in which you could, throw the sword, but they cut it out. Or the people who did this video is doing Mike a disservice, but the video's 29 minutes long already, but not everyone's like me or like my audience that I have. I'm happy for a video to go to 2 hours if necessary. All right, so the next one.
One of the ways in which armor defends you is by creating curved surfaces, glancing surfaces. And of course, the body is always moving as well. So you can never land a pure 90-degree strike.
Yes, generally he's correct, but again, it's a matter of absolute statements. I dislike absolute statements because like you can never land a good solid 90-degree strike on armor. Yes, armor is generally made to deflect stuff because of the curved surfaces, but you could never land, yes, you can land a perfect 90-degree strike sometimes. And if you do that, you have a much more efficient transfer of force when you do it as well.
Obviously, the first thing to say about decoration, it was only ever available to the wealthy.
Generally, of course, again, absolutely. Unless you killed someone who was wealthy, there you got it. Or, it's handed down, or we found it on the battlefield. So you didn't have to kill them, but it was a booty. The other thing, and there's actually a broader misconception about, there's a intuitive logic you would assume with that wealthy things are only available to the wealthy. That should probably be rephrased that wealthy things are easily available to the wealthy, because there's actual cases where the poor people, the peasants, got a hold of very wealthy things. How? They saved up. It was harder for them to get it, but they could get it. And so there's actually a law instituted to stop peasants wearing fine clothing because they're getting mistaken for nobility. People are industrious, okay? They're clever, and they like nice things. I think that's a generally true statement, not whole, but generally true for most periods in history. Mike is generally true here, and so is this fair? Me saying, well, maybe, I don't know. I've always found it has value in adding the missing context, just so we get a more rounded and more accurate understanding of the subject we're talking about. There are, of course, situations when poor people could get a hold of wealthy swords, decorating, embroidering, and inlays and stuff. And we'll finish off the part because he says the type of decoration. Let's hear what Mike says.
It was also much, much more restrained than we see here.
It depends. There are some decorated swords which the whole thing is just covered in gold and patterns and things. I have a video on Shadowversity called Fancy Swords, Fantasy vs. Reality, or something along those lines. And I show you in that video some of the references of historical swords that still survive to this day that are just decorated everywhere. There were times when they weren't restrained like that. The difference is, and this might be the thing Mike was actually referring to, is the way that they're shaped, they're designed, the way they're designed, okay? They usually reflect, and this is the whole point of that video I made, reflect more realistic sword design proportions. And the ones we see here in For Honor that is reviewing, the crossguard's really bulbous and overweight, and the blades are thick and they're out of shape and all, and that's the real errors with those swords. But yeah, just my thoughts on that one. We'll move on to the next.
Occasionally, you will find one that has got some gilding on the crossguard or on the pommel, but you really need to leave the blade as plain as possible because you don't want to compromise the integrity of the blade.
There are designs that you can put on a blade that doesn't compromise the effectiveness of the blade. Look at the Ulfbert inscriptions on Ulfbert blades, and also like gold inlay inscription stuff. And we saw that historically and things. So there's a general vein of logic here that I get what it's saying, because there are types of decoration you could add on a sword that could affect its strength and functionality. And if you're after a sword that is optimized in every way for its utility, its usefulness and stuff, yeah, you probably want those types of designs. Again, there's just another side to kind of analyze, which he could have actually mentioned, and that was cut. I don't know what was cut. Moving on.
You just can't actually get it out.
So I was talking about back scabbards here. We all know you can, you just need the right scabbard.
That length over the shoulder. Swords are worn in scabbards at the hip, and outside swords, very, very long swords, are carried over the shoulder. It just that simple.
Medieval period, I have a video discussing all the reasons why they didn't do it. Because when you really look at it, it doesn't look like we don't have any evidence of anyone doing it, but an absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. So someone might have done it very well. There is some practical utility about doing it, which I found when doing it myself. And is there a way in which you can make it so you can draw the sword from your back? Yes, there is. We don't have any examples, so, it's better to err on the side to not, because you show it once and people say, that's just that. But it's become the standard in fantasy and things, and I can see the utility in games and also movies as to why it can fit within a fantasy setting, like The Witcher and stuff. Oh, actually, The Witcher doesn't have the right swords, so, or right sword scabbards, because if you actually tried to draw it with a regular sword scabbard, of course, Mike, what he's saying is right here, you're not going to get it out. All right, next one.
The axes of the later medieval period, what are known as battle axes, were predominantly a horseman's weapon.
This is one of those things where my response would be source, meaning I need the source for that one, because I've never heard that before. And it also is like, hang on, predominantly cavalry, like I'm very confident in infantry would have used axes in some periods in the late medieval period. I suspect that there's sources that would refute that. I just can't confirm it because none come to my mind. But yeah, it's just like, I wonder, because this is one of the things that medieval enthusiasts can do, and I've done in the past as well, is that we find a practice of something being done in the medieval period, and then we assume it was done broadly over the whole medieval period, when in actual reality, it was done in a specific time and specific location in the medieval period. It might have been done in only medieval Italy in the 1300s. Okay? But, the whole medieval period and stuff, and so I'm perfect. Could there have been a situation when the battle axe was favored by cavalry, by a certain unit type, in a certain time period, in a certain location? I think that's very possible. Very possible. Does that mean battle axes were preferred by cavalry more predominantly through the whole medieval period? My intuition is that is far too broad a statement to be accurate. Is it though? I'm not saying, could it be? I just, source. That's my thoughts on that one.
First, the narrator is calling it a poleaxe instead of a poleaxe. There were such things as pole arms and a whole family of weapons that are on long poles. But the poleaxe, P-O-L-L, axe, is what knights called this slightly shorter polearm. All
right, this is a level of pedantry I can appreciate, okay? But in reality, okay, as much as I can appreciate this level of pedantry, it doesn't matter how you say it. You can say poleaxe, you can say pollux, you can say any way you want. But it does establish a standard though. So if that's going to be my standard about that level of accuracy, this is why I have stopped it, okay? Because if I said, no, you need to pronounce it this way, well, I've already spoken about how atrocious the Australian accent is. It's like, I'm just shooting myself in the foot here. It's like, all right then, Shad, hold yourself to the same standard. You're saying everything wrong. And it goes for so many things. This is why this level of pedantry, I think is I can appreciate it because it comes from a love of the medieval period. It's like, yes, but is that how they said in the medieval period before the great vowel shift? To try and say you need to say things the way they were said in the past is oftentimes we are appealing to Victorian pronunciation when things got formalized and this is the whole thing that where we read into with the matriculations controversy, and this was a great discussion, okay, and this one was kicked off by Lloyd of Lindybeige, where he said that he felt matriculations should be pronounced maciculations, maciculations, and then Matt Easton replies and says, no, I think it's machiculations or machiculation, okay, and it got in this big what's the right pronunciation? And ultimately, it doesn't matter, okay. The purpose of language is to convey information, and if the person understands what you're referring to, it can be called a dingle hopper, and that's a perfectly adequate name for it. That's the purpose of language, ultimately. There is absolutely a value in trying to find out how they were said in the past, but there's a whole period in between where oftentimes we get hung up on what we think is the right pronunciation when it wasn't, okay? When the actual original pronunciation is really hard to figure out because of vowel shifts and stuff like that. And so Matt's point originally with matriculations is that the CH was pronounced sh, and because that's how it's currently pronounced in French, okay? But when looking at it, Matt actually found some sources, and Metatron, Raffaello, also confirmed this, is a linguist, is that no, there's also a kind of pronunciation shift in French that they pronounced the CH as ch and not sh before the switch. And so after all this back and forth, it turned out the most likely way it was pronounced was with the hard CH, matriculations, the way that I was saying it in the beginning. But even if it wasn't, it ultimately doesn't matter because it's about conveying information. Yet it is, I totally get it. It's instructive to know how it was pronounced. Was this the way Poleaxe was pronounced? I don't know. But if that is the standard that we'll go to, because there's an example later on in which Mike actually mispronounces something. The pronunciation that I get, I'm simply appealing to the current Italian pronunciation. It's probably not the accurate pronunciation of the native. So, you see, it's ultimately a pointless endeavor unless you know what the original language was. I think this, like, I appreciate it, makes me laugh. I like he's a true enthusiast. I ultimately think it's not needed. Pollux versus Poleaxe. I think Poleaxe is perfectly fine.
In this clip, the speed of getting the arrow onto the string was credible. That I can shoot that fast, maybe even a little faster. What takes longer is the second stage, the drawing back. You're drawing a longbow from your feet to your neck. Every muscle is engaged in pulling that string back, and you pull it back here, behind the ear. A longbow is a powerful weapon. 180 pounds, maybe even 200 pounds draw weight, the amount it takes to pull that string back. This is a massive athletic endeavor. That has to be repeated over and over again. So there are questions of stamina.
80 to 200 pounds only in the uppermost brackets. Like, my goodness, this is a hotly debated topic. I have found out what the standard draw weights of the medieval longbow. And I usually like to actually make a different category between longbow and warbow, because this is where some of the confusion comes in. With Mike saying here, and especially with the editing, because this is one of those points where I was saying it sounded like they might have cut out the weight categories he might have said before them, like the lower ends, because 180 pounds to 200 pounds, according to what we understand and know of medieval warbows, that is not the average standard. If I was to give some estimates at the moment, and this varies on who you ask, like very much so, the standard weights seem to be, and again, like there'll be people who will disagree with me because they look to other sources, will be 120 pounds. The full range of warbow category is can be from 70 pounds and up. Reluctant to accept the 70 pound. I'm willing to accept the 70 pound because I think anything that you would not use for casual, when I say casual, for like hunting, okay, and recreation, if you're not using any weight categories for that, what weight category is it the things for it? Warfare. Seems like it's fair to include this as well for, because 70 pounds is overkill for hunting. You don't need a 70 pound for hunting. You can, okay? And so if anything, 70 pounds seems to be the crossover point, the upper end for hunting and recreation, and the lowest of the low end for the warbow category. But some people don't like it because they think it's too weak, 100 pound being the minimum, okay? And 100 pound is significant. This is double the weight, the difficulty to pull back on most Olympic-style target archery bows. 45 pounds is kind of the average for a regular adult. And so 100 pounds is more than double. You can't shoot that 100-pound bow without training or building up to it unless you're already really built. The next part, he says, in the context of like the highest end of the warbow category, but he's saying longbow here. And longbow is not actually a category of weight class because there were hunting longbows as well. He's clearly referring to warbows, but even in the context of warbows, he's only referring to the upper like echelon in their weight category. To say that every warbow is going to be slow in its draw because it's so heavy is incorrect. And I don't know if it was cutting or overemphasis that drew him to overemphasize and state this. But I can speed shoot my 100-pound warbow. Okay, I've got many videos doing it, and my record at the moment is 18 arrows in a minute, but that's only on a perfect run. But this point about the bow specifically, yeah, seems so specific and restricted to only a very smaller category of warbow, the highest end. As to how fast you can shoot when you reach 120, 150 pounds, I would love to see. Because I've always said, all right, you're obviously going to slow down somewhat, but if you can condition yourself to shoot a poundage of bow even higher, then that means the lower pound bows will be easier as well. And I can shoot a 100-pound bow with multiple sets of 20 arrows in fast success. So what is the most? I think I've done 4 sets of 20, one after. So I'll do a set of 20, go down, bring them, put them back in, another set of 20, trying to go as fast as I can, just training the way to draw things. And I didn't feel overly fatigued in my back muscles and arm muscles in doing that, okay? And that's on a 100-pound. Of course, you would assume your fatigue would increase when you go up, but when you go up and you surpass that, and then you go back down to the midpoint, so if you got to 120, but then you can shoot 140 pounds, then the 120 pound becomes as easy as it was to shoot 100 pound, and so you technically should be able to shoot the 120 pound as easy. And so the highest ends, I would probably agree, yeah, good luck trying to speed shoot a 180 or 200 pound bow, but to say it so categorically that that applies to all longbow categories, especially the ones that fall into still in the warbow categories, like 100 and 120 pound, you know, like you can shoot faster, absolutely. And the other pound weight rates should be considered. And I'll finish off this point that there are some people who actually feel the current warbow categories are overestimated, okay? I have not been able to confirm this, all right? So in my video, I was talking about Mary Rose and said that this is one of the better points of reference we have for medieval bows. There is a person who took umbrage with those statements and made a reply on the internet saying I was wrong. And he shared some other references of these other bows that are considered medieval, you know, longbows, and they have different estimates on the weight category, stating that he feels their weight category is too high. I have not been able to confirm that because there are other people who, with their sources, who are very adamant. They're now trying to say that the lowest category of warbow is 120 pounds, not 100 pounds. And so if you ever went to them and said it's actually about 70 pounds to 140 pounds is the category of medieval warbows, not like early Renaissance Mary Rose bows, that's the kind of the equivalent, that would cry murder. Because I did that. I was in a chat group and I was quoting a curator for a museum, and he said the weight category of warbows started at 170 pounds.
Sorry, I misspoke. The curator actually said the warbow category started at 70 pounds.
And they were like, what? Just trying to make me out that I was a clown. I was like, I've got the source right here, okay? It's a curator of the museum looking at the Mary Rose replicas. It is a contentious area, right? And so this gentleman who was saying that medieval warbows, we should not look to the Mary Rose references as a primary source because, no, they're not medieval, but I still think we can look at them as a source because they're not too far removed. But you're saying you should look at these other examples. When looking at these other examples, the standard weight categories is actually much less than other people are saying. There are a lot of people who strongly disagree with it. And so that puts me in the middle. It's like, I don't know.
What are you going to do? Set individual people alight as a bonus because you've already killed them with your arrow? You would use them in sieges and in terror raids.
It's absolutely right. Fire arrows are dumb shooting this as a person, but I think it's giving him way too much credit even in sieges and stuff like that. And I think Lloyd from Lindbage did a great video debunking most of this. There are a lot of things you need to set up previous to make a fire arrow actually work, and that's just to keep the flame on the arrow when you shoot the thing, okay? Let alone actually being able to effectively set something on fire when it hits it. And they've done tests, and they barely set anything on fire, okay? They're not that great at doing it. Even against thatched roofs, the thatch is really thick. You shoot a fire into it, it buries into the thatch, and it snuffs out because there's no air for it. They are surprisingly ineffective at setting things on fire. Yeah, look, I'm not saying fire can't be dangerous. If it actually set light to something, it could cause major issues. But for one, accuracy with a medieval warbow, okay? You could accurately shoot an arrow over a castle wall, but to pinpoint the thatched roofs from a very far distance, you'd be surprised at how difficult that is, actually. We shall continue.
Once you've extended and thrust that, if the person gets inside that point, it's easy to either cleave your thin wooden shaft with their sword or their axe, or to get hold of that spear and wrench it out of your hand.
So it's talking about fighting someone with a spear. He's right about grabbing hold of the spear so fighting a spear, you want to get inside that spearhead. I thought he said at one point that they can't do anything then. I can't remember if he said it or not, so if he didn't, my apologies, because there is something you can do if you get inside. They can withdraw the spear and still use it really close to them. But cleaving the spear in half, this is something I addressed in my Mandalorian spear video recently. It was actually a lot harder to do. Difficult and far less chances because the spear has give and axe you have better chances, but not going to be such an easy task to chop the spear head off.
This clip had the element of surprise, and for any attack on a village to be successful, it needs an element of surprise.
It's one of those very broad statements. He said, for any attack to be successful, you need I was like, not really. I mean, it's not to underplay the advantage of having surprise. And I wonder if he's looking at it in the sense that if they know you're coming, they'll just leave. Any attack. I guess whenever someone first learns of the attack, even if it's a month ahead of the time of the attack, that's a form of a surprise. So I don't know, but you'd assume that the element of surprise is that they only learn of the attack as you attack. And I think there will be lots of situations where they'll know the attack is coming before the attack actually happens, and it would still be successful. So
in this clip is the kite shield, a sort of Norman-style shield from the sort of 11th century. By the 12th century, it had already gone out. So it has a very limited time period to a very...
That is the general understanding in medieval enthusiasm. So there are kind of... We talked about this in the last stream, actually, that there are things that are repeated that have a general truth. It's like, So you could say the heyday, the height of the kite shield was that period, but that they stopped being used and they weren't seen after it. No, they were continued to be used. I have visual references of late medieval period artwork showing people using kite shields. They definitely still used after this period because they're a brilliant shield. Like, I love the kite shields are awesome. Are we being pedantic? I don't know, because is he referring to the Norman style of kite shield? Well, I mean, it goes without saying then that you might not find many Norman style kite shields after the Norman, period of the middle period after Norman invasion stuff. But you would. I think you would. Like, it depends. How do you find a Norman style kite shield versus other styles of kite shields? So that's undefined, and you couldn't really claim that because, there are definitely examples of kite shields into the late medieval period because it is an awesome shield. Brilliant. And in terms of shield diversity, the late medieval period had some wacky ones. There were so many different types of shields. In fact, we'll get to one of the other popular shields of the later medieval period because Mike mentions it. And I think this is where one of those situations where being particular about pronunciation might get us caught.
The final shield in Mordhau is the Pavis.
The Pavis.
How do you pronounce Pavis? Pavis? Or should we pronounce it, because it's an Italian word? Like, this is the actual thing about this word specifically. It's still used in Italy. I've spoken with a Metatron, and there's even a snack food called Pavis or Pavesi. And so it is undoubtedly an Italian word. So, how should we pronounce it? Again, it goes back, I've already given my opinion. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. People understand what shield I'm referring to when I say Pavis or when I say Pavese. Because the correct pronunciation in Italian is Pavese. Are you Pavese? Metatron is Italian, he let me know. And more recently, because I've mentioned the Pavese or Pavis in my one of my recent videos on the spiked Pavis. And it's funny, I filmed a video, I talked to Metatron, he told me the pronunciation, but the video wasn't out. So I knew the pronunciation before the video was out, but not when I filmed it. But when the video came out, there was a lot of people who was willing to share with me the correct pronunciation. When I talk about the plural version of perverser, because that's all it always got me stuck up. And so the singular is perverser, but the plural is perversi. So if you had more than one perverser, you would have two perversi, or perversi. I don't know which sound you hold the sound on. If we wanted to be pedantic, if we felt words were supposed to be pronounced in certain ways to be more accurate, well, we could get hung up on this and say, well, actually, it's perverser, and the plural perversi. This is one of the problems when you be so pedantic about pronunciation, because you're going to shoot yourself in the foot, because guaranteed you don't pronounce everything correct yourself. Having said that, he's perfectly fine to hold that standard, and he might love the fact that, oh, that's how you pronounce it. Boom, I'm going to be perverser. Pavises, it's all good. It's all good. And so those are all the kind of thoughts that came to me when I was seeing that video. I was a little bit hesitant doing it because I love Mike Loads, and I hope he takes, I'm not sure if he ever sees this video, but he might. And I hope he takes it in the spirit in which it's just this is what we do in the community store. So Matt Easton's Scholar Gladiatoria. I know Mike knows Thane Thrand, and I have a good relationship with Thrand as well. And so the back and forth, the discussion, because we just want to learn more about the things. And so this wasn't an attack. I want to end off with that because I love it. I think Mike has done phenomenal work blazing the trail of bringing the medieval period into the popular mindset, okay? Like I said, it was like the previous generation, because now the current guys holding the torch are actually guys like me and the other guys in the community store here on YouTube that have a fairly decent following and are now picking up and continuing on the work that he has been doing for a while already. So I appreciate your work, mate. And also, I'd love to see you in these other videos as well. And I was just sharing some additional thoughts and context on what you're saying. So thank you for it. And that's basically, that's all I wanted to mention on that.